let's start off with the main story I wanted to talk about today. That's not the main story, but one of the stories I wanted to talk about today. And that is the Republican Party being a cult. Now, accusing a political party to be a cult is a big accusation, right? Now, the problem is, it's looking more and more like that every single day. Now, there's a million things I could point to. I could point to Trump on 9/11 3 days ago, gave a virtual speech and praised a extremely crazy ass cult called the Moonies, where they do giant religious mass weddings where you don't meet your bride until your wedding day, and they believe that Reverend Mooney, the founder of this church that started in Korea shortly after the Korean War, was a messiah sent to finish the work of Jesus Christ. And of course, there was the offshoot in the United States, and of course the American offshoot, started by his son that shot off from the church, believes everything that I just said, with one exception. They also believe that AR-15s are holy instruments, and they have them during weddings and church services because they believe they are the rod of iron talked about in the Bible. Now, I could talk at length about, oh, this is the man who leads that, by the way, this man right here. We could talk about this, right? And the fact Trump, oh, this guy's also a massive Trump supporter, by the way. Just gonna throw that in there. I could talk about that, right? But now, that's not really proving cult behavior. That's just proving that Trump himself has endorsed cults that support him, right? I could talk about Representative Madison Cawthorn, Major Taylor Greene, and any host of elected Republicans perpetuating the fraudulent myth about there being massive election fraud during the last election that caused Biden to get elected. That his own staff, all the way up to William Barr, has rejected, and he's fired some of that staff for telling the truth. And all these audits and all these lawsuits and everything has turned up nothing. In fact, the recent Arizona election audit that a lot of people who were perpetuating this myth were pointed to ended about a month ago. And what did it show? They went over 3 million ballots in Arizona. What did it turn up? Like 200 cases of possible fraud. 200 cases out of 3 million. Certainly not enough to overturn an election. And that's only 200 possible. Meaning, maybe 50 of them might actually be fraudulent votes. Anyway, not only that, but of course, Representative Madison Cawthorn saying that there will be bloodshed if the fraud occurs in the future. And when asked if he's planning another January 6th, he said he's working on that. You know, the day people tried to overthrow the government unsuccessfully in an extremely uncoordinated manner, but they attempted to do so. Bombs were planted. The rest is history. I had the sad reality of actually being there when it happened in a Biden hoodie. Probably wasn't the smartest move I ever made, to be completely honest. Double Chinsy, thank you so much for the Prime Gaming. But no, that just proves... Oh, also, we could also talk about the Republican leadership fight where you're saying, okay, well, fine, but there's many Republicans who don't endorse this nonsense. What about them? Oh, you mean like Representative Liz Cheney, who even though she voted with Trump like 96% of the time, was replaced with somebody who voted for Trump along Trump lines when it comes to legislation, replaced with somebody who only did that 76% of the time. Well, wouldn't that prove that it isn't a cult around Mr. Donald J. Trump? What problem? The reason she was removed was because even though she supported these voter registration laws, or I call them voter restriction laws, but voter registration laws or voter barriers between people in the vote, even though she supported it, she would not say that the election was fraudulent, which got her removed from the second most powerful House seat. Now, that isn't enough still to prove cult behavior. The fact that the Republican Party establishment is willing to perpetuate the lie and they're willing to purge people, and that Trump himself has endorsed cults. While that's a lot of hints, that's not enough, because that only proves that Trump himself is fine with cults if they support him, and that the Republican Party is willing to perpetuate that lie to serve Trump and not get on his bad side. But what about the base of the Republican Party. Now, that's not all Republicans to say the base, but what if this is a minority position that is taken a hold of the Republican Party establishment because they just don't want Trump to be angry at them? What if that's the reality? And that is when the last piece of evidence has come to me. Oh, by the way, this is unrelated, but I still haven't forgot about Mo Brooks and the body armor, okay? Why did he have body armor on January 6th before anything happened? But this is when the last piece of evidence comes forward. There was a CNN poll done recently. Now, you can be angry about a CNN poll, but this is not the first poll of this type, but it is the first poll to ask the question in this way. There have been multiple polls asking about the Republican base's ideas around election fraud, and a majority of Republicans believe that Trump is the rightful president, and they do believe that the election was stolen. Now, that already is a huge hint, but the way this question was organized and written, I think, is the final nail in this coffin for me. 59% of self-identified Republicans say that believing that Donald Trump won the 2020 election is important to what being a Republican means to them. Let me read that one more time. 59% of self-identified Republicans say that believing that Donald Trump won the 2020 election is important to what being a Republican means to them. Meaning this is supposed to sit there along values like gun control and deregulation. This, for me, was when I threw my hands up in the air. When I said multiple times that it feels like the Republican Party is becoming the cult of Trump, I always said becoming. Looking at this, I think I need to change my rhetoric to has become the cult around Donald J. Trump. 59% of self-identified Republicans say believing that Donald Trump won the 2020 election is important to what being a Republican means to them. That doesn't mean they just believe this as just something they passively believe. People passively believe things, or people believe things politically that aren't inherent to their belief structure or is not a huge thing about them, right? There's small beliefs I have around politics that is not deeply held beliefs, right? Like, for example, my position on the death penalty is deeply held. Some of my beliefs around zoning laws are less deeply held. This is a deeply held belief that it is a fundamental value to being a Republican is believing that he won that election, alongside gun control, alongside deregulation, alongside lower taxes. You can now slot this, perpetuating a lie about the 2020 election, in with those other values. So let me line up just the things that we know from this week. On the anniversary of 9/11, Donald Trump decided to speak in front of the Unification Church, also more popularly and more deridedly known as the Moonies, the church that believes that Reverend Moon was sent as a Messiah by Jesus Christ to Korea to arrange mass marriages and overlook abuse scandal after abuse scandal. Members of his church as periodically needed to be de-radicalized, and even his own daughters have derided them as they ignored her abuse and said that when she was beaten, it was her fault. Of course, there's the offshoot in the United States that believes that the AR-15 is the rod of iron and it's a biblical object, and their leader, Reverend Moon's son, wears a crown of bullets, which the picture for that should be right above my head now, and believes AR-15s need to be used in a pseudo-religious ceremonies during weddings and church services. That's the first thing. He not only spoke at their conference, he endorsed the organization and its efforts in the world. It's also one of its fundamental principles is anti-communism, so it is not just like a removed from politics organization. It is an explicitly political cult, as I think the AR-15 should have somewhat implied. So, okay, Donald Trump is actively getting involved in cults and endorsing cults for his political benefit. Republican leadership is being purged, like Liz Cheney, for not believing the big lie when it comes to 2020. She was the second most powerful House Republican, and she was purged out. Geek will put an article about it over my head right now. They're purging leadership. New members, the new flock in the Republican Party, whether it be Madison Cawthorn, Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, are pushing this conspiracy theory. With Cawthorn calling for bloodshed and saying that he's working on another January 6th. And then, of course, you move to the base itself. Oh, and of course, Donald Trump himself has continued to perpetuate this lie, even at recent gatherings. And of course, then there's this information that 59% Republicans don't only believe this, actually it would probably be a higher percentage, but 59% believe it is important to what being a Republican means to them. Look, I regularly have said that the Republican Party is becoming the cult of Trump. Might have already honestly become it. I think that's quite sad. I mean, think of this. 59% believe very important. Well, very or somewhat, at least. Actually, if you look at the numbers, it gets worse. Very is much more than somewhat. Jesus Christ.